There's a moment in every news cycle where you stop, stare at the headline, and genuinely cannot tell if you're reading a satirical newsletter or the front page of a major newspaper. We are firmly in that moment. The President of the United States has declared a war over. Not with a formal address, not with a signed agreement, not with any of the traditional markers of diplomatic resolution, but with a casual, offhand comment to a reporter wrapped in the kind of confidence you'd expect from a man describing a weekend trip that got slightly out of hand. "I think the war is very complete," he said. Pretty much. Those two words, pretty much, doing an enormous amount of diplomatic heavy lifting there. Pretty much complete, like a college essay the night before it's due, like a half-assembled piece of IKEA furniture you've decided is fine, like democracy itself at this particular moment in history. But here we are. This all unfolded over the span of a single remarkable news cycle. And if you blinked, you missed several contradictory statements, a genuine national security concern about naval mines, several $1 billion in government spending on luxury furniture and steaks, and a growing collection of matching shoes being distributed to powerful men who are absolutely terrified not to wear them. We're going to get into all of it because individually each of these stories is absurd. Together, they form a kind of mosaic of the current moment that you genuinely need to sit with for a while. Let's start with the war, or the excursion, or the tremendous success that is also still ongoing. To understand where we are, you have to appreciate the sheer verbal acrobatics being performed at the highest levels of American governance right now. On one side, you have a president saying the conflict is essentially wrapped up, done, finished, a win. He stood before cameras and described it as a short-term excursion, which is a phrase that has probably never before been used to describe a military engagement in recorded human history. Short-term excursion, like you popped over to a neighboring country, sorted a few things out, and now you're back and everything's fine and there's a gift shop receipt in your pocket. And yet, and this is where the story gets genuinely interesting, his own defense secretary was simultaneously delivering a completely different message. Where the president was projecting closure, his top defense official was framing the situation as something very much still in motion, something that was, in his words, just the beginning. So a reporter, doing exactly what reporters are supposed to do, walked up to a microphone and asked the obvious question. "You've said the war is very complete, but your defense secretary is saying this is just the beginning. Which is it?" And the answer, delivered without any apparent sense of irony, was that you could say it both. You can say it both. It's over, and it's still going. It's complete, and it's beginning. It is a Schrodinger's war, existing in two states simultaneously until observed by a journalist, at which point it collapses into whatever answer is most politically convenient. Now, to be fair, there is a version of this framing that almost makes logical sense. You could argue that a specific phase of a military operation has concluded, while broader strategic objectives continue. Military conflicts do operate in phases. Terminology matters. These distinctions are real. But that is not the energy with which any of this was communicated. The energy was pure improvisational confidence, the rhetorical equivalent of someone walking into a meeting they forgot about and deciding to just wing it and see what sticks. "We could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here," he said, and then immediately added that they were going to go further. They've achieved success. They're not stopping. That's the message. Do with it what you will. Hours after these declarations of victory, the tone shifted abruptly. Suddenly, the president was back on social media issuing stark warnings about the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which somewhere between 20 and 30% of the world's oil supply passes every single day. It is, by any measure, one of the most strategically critical choke points on the planet. And the fact that it became relevant again within the same news cycle as the victory announcement tells you something important about the gap between the rhetoric and the reality on the ground. The concern was serious. Intelligence assets had reportedly begun detecting signs that Iran was taking steps to deploy mines in the Hormuz shipping lane, naval mines, in one of the most heavily trafficked and economically vital waterways in the world. If that reporting was accurate, it represented a significant escalation, the kind of development that typically triggers urgent closed-door briefings, careful diplomatic signaling, and measured public statements designed not to inflame a delicate situation. What it triggered instead was a social media post declaring that if any mines had been placed and were not removed forthwith, the military consequences into Iran would be, and this is a direct quote, at a level never seen before. He also noted, for the record, that there were no current reports of mines being deployed, which makes the ultimatum somewhat unusual, since he was essentially issuing a severe threat in response to something he simultaneously claimed wasn't happening. But the logic of, we have no evidence of this, but if it turns out we do, we will respond with unprecedented force, is at least internally consistent in a certain aggressive deterrence kind of way. Maybe, if you squint. The broader context here matters. The Strait of Hormuz is not a new flashpoint. It has been the site of tensions, incidents, and standoffs for decades. Any action that threatens the free flow of shipping through that corridor doesn't just affect the United States. It ravels energy markets globally, raises costs for consumers in Europe and Asia, and sends signals to every regional power watching the situation unfold. It is, to put it mildly, not the kind of thing you want to be navigating at the same time you're trying to declare a war finished while also insisting it might be getting bigger. The optics alone are complicated. The strategic reality is even more so. But while all of that was unfolding on the geopolitical stage, a separate and equally remarkable story was emerging from a government watchdog report about how the Department of Defense has been spending public money. And this is where things take a turn that is harder to explain charitably. The short version is this. A significant amount of federal spending, overseen by a Defense Department that has been loudly and publicly committed to the idea of cutting waste and government bloat, went toward purchases that have absolutely nothing to do with military readiness. Let's just go through some of the numbers because they deserve to be said out loud. $5.3 million on new iPads. That number, sitting inside a defense budget, raises obvious questions about what exactly required that many iPads, and whether those iPads are currently sitting in storage somewhere, still in their boxes. $60,000 on Herman Miller recliners, which are excellent chairs, genuinely, top of the line, but $60,000 worth of high-end office seating inside a department theoretically devoted to austere efficiency. $12,000 on fruit basket stands. Not the fruit, the stands for the fruit, the infrastructure upon which the fruit would sit. There is a philosophical commitment to luxury embedded in that purchase that is hard to fully articulate. And then there's the food. The Pentagon reportedly spent $2 million on crab legs, $6.9 million on lobster tail, over $15 million on ribeye steaks. To put that last number in some context, $15 million in ribeye steaks is not a catering mishap or a budgetary rounding error. It is a policy. It is a consistent, sustained commitment to a particular vision of what the people running the American military deserve to eat. And look, maybe there's context here that softens the picture somewhat. Maybe some of these figures span multiple years, multiple facilities, multiple dining programs serving large numbers of personnel. That context would matter. But the headline numbers, standing on their own, paint a portrait that is genuinely difficult to reconcile with the rhetoric of fiscal discipline that has animated so much of this administration's messaging. There were also, for the record, $140,000 on donuts, $124,000 on ice cream machines, and this one is worth reading twice, $3,160 on stickers featuring characters from Dora the Explorer, Frozen, and Paw Patrol inside the Pentagon. The argument that this is lean, aggressive government cost-cutting is not available to anyone who knows about the Paw Patrol stickers. That argument has been retired. It is resting comfortably somewhere, probably on a Herman Miller recliner, eating a ribeye. The furniture numbers are arguably the most striking. In 2025 alone, the Pentagon spent $225 million on new furniture. That is more money spent on office furniture in a single year than the department had spent in over an entire decade. And among the line items in that furniture binge was $98,000 for a Steinway grand piano purchased for the Air Force Chief of Staff's official residence. A Steinway grand piano. The Air Force Chief of Staff, who is presumably a person with significant responsibilities related to aircraft, military aviation, national defense, and the general security of the United States, apparently needed a world-class concert piano in their home. To be fair, the ability to play a technically demanding piano piece under pressure is perhaps closer to the demands of modern warfare than it might initially appear. But probably not. Probably not. It is worth pausing here to note the particular dissonance at work. The same government that has used the language of waste cutting and efficiency to justify freezing social programs, pulling back on public services, and reducing support structures that real people depend on, has simultaneously been authorizing this level of luxury spending inside its own walls. That gap between the stated ideology and the actual behavior is not a small one. It's the kind of gap that erodes trust. And that erosion doesn't happen quietly. People notice. They remember. And right now, a lot of people are noticing. If any of this has left you wondering what is holding American governance together right now, the answer might surprise you. The answer, apparently, is shoes. Specifically, a collection of matching dress shoes being personally selected and distributed by the president to members of his inner circle, advisors, cabinet officials, senators, and media allies. The process, as described by White House sources, works like this. The president looks at someone, guesses their shoe size. He does not measure, he guesses. And then approximately a week later, that person receives a pair of Floorshine wingtip dress shoes in the mail. No note, no request, just the shoes. Now, there are a few ways to interpret this practice. One is that it is a genuinely warm, personal gesture from someone who happens to enjoy selecting gifts and finds satisfaction in the tangible act of giving something physical. That reading is available. Another reading, however, the one that seems to be circulating among people who work inside these buildings, is that the shoes function as a kind of loyalty signal, a wearable statement of affiliation, a visible marker that you are, in some meaningful sense, aligned with the person who gave them to you. And the evidence for this reading comes from the detail that everyone is afraid to not wear them. That's the word being used inside those circles, afraid. Not reluctant, not uncertain, afraid. Which tells you something about the nature of the gesture that the warm, gift-giving interpretation struggles to accommodate. The list of people currently wearing the shoes includes, among others, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Commerce, at least one prominent media figure, and a United States Senator. When you lay them out like that, you're looking at a meaningful cross-section of executive power and political influence, all wearing the same shoes, all of which were selected by the same man without him measuring anyone's feet. And here's where the detail becomes genuinely surreal. He overshoots. He doesn't always get the size right. There are photographs circulating of senior officials wearing shoes that are visibly, obviously too large for their feet. You can see the gap. You can see the way the shoe doesn't quite fit, and they're wearing them anyway. Because the shoe is not really about the shoe. The owner of the company whose shoes were apparently selected for this program has stated publicly that he was unaware of the president's orders and declined to comment further. That's a reasonable response from a businessman who did not ask to become a symbol of anything and would probably prefer not to be. There is a version of this story that's funny, and it is funny. The image of grown men in positions of enormous power shuffling around in slightly too large wingtips because they're afraid to leave them in the closet is genuinely comedic. But underneath the comedy, there's something that deserves attention. Because the dynamic it describes, the implicit expectation of visible, physical, public alignment with the person at the top, and the fear that comes with not performing that alignment, is not a small thing. It's a texture of power that tells you something about how the whole operation is currently running. This is the political moment we're in. A war that is complete but still going. Billions in public money flowing toward lobster tails and concert pianos and Paw Patrol stickers, while the rhetoric of austerity plays on loop. Intelligence reports about mines in one of the world's most critical waterways met with social media ultimatums, and a silent, spreading collection of matching dress shoes worn by powerful men who are, by their own account, a little bit afraid to take them off. If you've made it this far, you already know why any of this matters. Not because it's funny, though some of it is genuinely funny, but because the gap between what is being said and what is being done, between the stated principles and the actual choices, between the version of governance being sold and the version being practiced, is wide enough to walk through. And the question of what fills that gap, or who, is one worth taking seriously, even when the material makes you laugh. Maybe especially then. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and maybe double-check the fit on those shoes before you put them on.